Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about two artists, Ruth Asawa and Cecilia Vicuna, who both work with shape in space in two very different ways. So I brought a slideshow to show you. Ruth Asawa was a Japanese American artist who was born in California in 1926. She lived a large part of her life in San Francisco and taught in a lot of our schools. Here she is in her studio. You can see all her sculptures hanging above her head. She was a very busy artist. She was also a mother to six children, and she would often work around the house on her sculptures while she was caring for children. And there was no separation for her between making art and life, everyday life. You could be making dinner and making a sculpture all at the same time. Here's one of her sculptures. She wove wire. And what I really love about these is the shadows that they cast. If you go see them, looking at the shadows, it's just really interesting. When Ruth Asawa made these, she worked with one continuous wire and she thought a lot about the shapes, making the inside shapes and then the shapes around them and the outside shapes. And she looks at the positive and negative space too, the shapes that you see and also the space that you see around them, the white space. And the shadows also help you see the difference between the positive and the negative space. She got the idea of working with wire on a trip to Mexico, and she watched the native basket weaving process, how they were weaving the straw to make the baskets. And she took that idea home with her and tried it with wire. What do these things look like? Where do you think she got her ideas? She says she was inspired a lot by everyday life, by things she saw in nature, things she experienced. For her, there wasn't a separation between life and art. Here's an installation view. That means a bunch of sculptures in an exhibit all together, so you can look at them as a group. And you can see some of their shadows on the back wall there too. If you go to the De Young Museum in San Francisco, you can see in the base of where the tower is, there's an installation of her sculptures there, so you can go look at them. When Ruth Asawa was a teenager, she was interned in an internment camp for Japanese Americans here in the United States. And she said that there she learned how to make art out of whatever she had on hand. And she also learned to draw from some Walt Disney artists who were also interned there. This was during World War II when the United States was fighting against Japan. And they decided they needed to put all the Japanese Americans in camps because we were fighting against the Japanese. And people stayed there for many years. And even after they got out of the camps, she wanted to be an art teacher, and they wouldn't give her a student teaching job because she was Japanese American. So there was a lot of racism against Japanese and Japanese Americans during that time. But she says these experiences helped her be who she was. I found a video of her working with some paper because remember, she worked with whatever she had around, much like we do right now. And I'd like to show it to you.
To make paper do what it hasn't done yet. So you're only talking about paper. And then when you're through with the lesson, then you fold it and you put it back in your drawer. It's paper again. What he was talking about was abstracting from the material, rather than being concerned with your own design ideas and forcing something into it. What you do is you become background, just like a parent allows the child to express himself, and the parent becomes sort of supportive.
Cecilia Vicuna is a Chilean artist who also lives in New York City. She splits her time between Chile and New York. And she works with precarios. These are her tiny little sculptures. She's been making these since 1966. So that's around 50 years. She began making her precarios as a teenager in Chile when she was wandering the beach and was picking up all these little discarded items that had been washed by the tides and smoothed and disintegrated a little bit. And she made these tiny little sculptures out of them, little delicate balances of shapes and space. What can you see in these? There's string and sticks, little balls of discarded trash that's been washed by the ocean. The shadows are really important in these too. And also, like Ruth Asawa, the positive and the negative space. While she was overseas studying art in London, her country was taken over by the dictator Pinochet, and she made a whole bunch of these in a protest against that takeover. She said that they were about how he treated the people like trash, and since she made them out of trash, this was a good explanation. And these were exhibited all together. I think there were over 400 of them. And she made a book about it and everything while she was in exile from her country during that dictatorship. She also talks a lot about climate change and industrial destruction of our lands when she makes these, because these are all the trash that's changing the environment and washing up and in places that used to be pure ecosystems that are now affected by debris and trash from industrialization. So she uses these sculptures to give you a lot of different ideas about what's going on in the world now and the effects of our lifestyle on the environment and the ecosystem by looking at people and things that were discarded by society. And here's another little one. What can you see here? Looks like a piece of plastic with a simple shell, and it's held up by two sticks. These are so simple, yet really interesting forms, and they're tiny, just a couple of inches wide. And here's a picture of an installation she did of them. This was at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive a couple of years ago. And the room was just filled with over 100 of these precarios, which she also called basuritas, like little pieces of trash. And there's so much detail. They're so interesting to look at. And she really wants you to think about discarded people and places and things. So we've looked at two artists, Ruth Asawa and Cecilia Vicuna, in two very different ways that they work with shape and form and space. One projecting her message of the environment and trash and how things and people are treated, and another working with looking at the forms and the shape of the forms in positive and negative space and how it takes up the area. So I have two different project ideas for you. I thought since Ruth Asawa worked with paper and what she had around, we would work with some paper because we have a lot of that right now, and that's an easy thing we have around. So I made some shapes out of some simple paper that I had. This is a donut sort of shape, and I can show you how to do this. And I made several of these. I thought if we suspended them together with a little string or something, we could make an interesting sculpture. There's some other interesting shapes. And I want you to think about the paper sculpture project that we did a while ago. Remember all these little things? If you make these large and we hang them, instead of pasting them down on a surface, we hang them and suspend them, we could come up with some really interesting sculptures and forms in space. I want you to think about all these little shapes and how we can attach them and make something that takes up some interesting space while thinking about the positive and the negative space. I wanted to show you a little bit about how I made some of these shapes, like this one. So I just took a piece of white paper, any paper is fine, folded it in half, cut strips not all the way to the top. You have to leave space so it doesn't fall apart. And I just took it and rolled it like this. Put a little bit of glue. See, now you have this cool shape like that. You can leave it like that. What I did to help it stay was I turned it inside out like that on each end. Now you have this shape like this, and you can even tape or glue these together so they stay together like a strange donut. Put a little glue in there, and then you've got this cool kind of shape, and you can do a lot with these. When I made these, that's just the same technique, but not done. I didn't make it all the way around. I just glued one side like that. Now another idea is working with trash and debris that you find around. Think about how Cecilia Vicuna worked on the beach, looking at what society had thrown away. And look around you. Look around on the streets, on the beach, and see what's there, what's evidence left behind, and what kind of sculptures you can make out of that. Or maybe you have another idea about sculpture in space altogether. The choice is yours, but I can't wait to see what you make.